I'm Alex Hall, District Park Ranger with the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. We are so thrilled to have you with us and excited for our final 3 presentations of the day: seals, nor'easters, and winter water birds. We'll cap it off with island-themed games. For today's full schedule, check out Eventbrite or Facebook pages. The links will be posted in the chat shortly. We also want to thank all of our presenters and partners for their time and effort in making this virtual festival a reality. Our first presentation of the day is Seals in the Harbor. We'll learn about the natural history of the 2 species of seals found in Boston Harbor, the research into their use of the harbor islands, and an exciting public science project. I'd now like to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Stephanie A. Wood, lecturer and researcher at UMass Boston. Stephanie has worked on several pinniped studies in the Northeast US, including seal captures and tagging, aerial survey work, and food habits studies. Much of her work has focused on the recovery of the US gray seal population. She received a PhD in environmental biology from the University of Massachusetts at Boston. Stephanie also serves on the steering committee of the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium. We encourage you to send us your questions throughout the presentation. You can type your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window or into the chat. Stephanie, the floor is now yours.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Alex. Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I'm sad we're not in person out on the water, but it would probably be quite chilly today, so maybe we're happy to be inside. So thanks for inviting me to come talk about seals in the harbor. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And just if you have questions, as Alex said, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat box, and I will periodically stop to answer questions people have. All right, so before I get into, let me get my pointer options, there we go. Before I get into the specifics of some of what's happening in Boston Harbor, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking just about the 2 species that we commonly see there. So one is the harbor seals, which you see here. They're called harbor seals because they tend to be more coastally distributed. They're on the smallish side when we're talking about seals. They're about 180 to 285 pounds. They're about 5 to 6 feet long, and they can live a fair amount of time, 25 to 30 years. Most seals, they have high mortality early in their life, but once they get to be about 3 or 4 years old, they can really live for a couple of decades. So those are the harbor seals that we see often in Boston Harbor. And then the other common species that we see are the gray seals. These are also sometimes called the horseheads. And so you see this is a large male, and you can see they have this sort of elongated shape. They are sexually dimorphic. So the males are a fair bit bigger than the females. So their adult size is about 550 to 880 pounds. They're about 7.5 to 10 feet. And they too, just like the harbor seals, can live well into their 20s and 30s once they get past that early life stage. You'll notice here on this animal, there's a brand there. You can see sort of a B166. This is a picture I took on Muskeget Island in 2002. And this was a male who had been born on Sable Island off the coast of Nova Scotia in 1972. So again, these animals live long, they move around. So we think about the animals in the harbor, but we know that this is just sort of one spot in which these animals use throughout the Northwest Atlantic. So these are the ones also who are having their pups right now. And this is the species that is commonly found also on the Outer Cape. If any of you have ever been down to the National Seashore and Truro and places like that, and Chatham Harbor and Monomoy, this is the species you'll see down there. So we see them overlapping in space and time throughout the northeast coast of the US. And I'll return to that a little bit in a bit. And then I just wanted to mention there are 2 other species which are seasonal visitors. These are ice seals, Over here we have harp seals, and they're called harps because of the pattern. You can't really see it in this picture on their back. And then we have hooded seals, which are aptly named because the males in particular have sort of this large snout. The males also have this red balloon that during the mating season, they blow out of their nostril, which if you're a female hooded seal, that looks really great to you. I wanted to mention these because we do sometimes see these species off the Northeast US coast. They are often young and male, the ones that we see here. They tend to sort of roam the farthest. But a couple of neat facts about these guys, the hooded seals in particular have the shortest lactation of any mammal. So they are born on ice that is often not stably attached to land. And so if you're a mom, you want to fatten up your pup as quick as possible because there's a good chance in this environment you'll get separated. And so these animals, these pups are weaned in about 3 days. So kind of a fun fact there. I think what I'll do is I'll stop for a minute before I get into some more specifics about Massachusetts and see if there's any questions at this point about any of what we've talked about. It looks like we're in good shape, I think. All right, so I will keep going. Excuse me. So when we're thinking about species and moving into different or newer areas, it's also important to think about the historic ecology of a species. And so both gray and harbor seals were hunted to very, very low levels and locally extirpated or locally extinct throughout much of the 20th century. So for a lot of people, it's fairly surprising when we see seals in places that if you are from this area of the world, you remember maybe being a kid and not seeing seals in a lot of different spots. I see a Q&A. Do seals live in groups? That's a great question. So at times of the year, they live in groups. So they come together. And so what they do is they come together at certain points during their life history. So we see them grouped together. This is a breeding beach. And so you can see there's females and pups and larger males. And so for gray seals, that's basically early December through early February. Harbor seals also come together for breeding. They actually, in the US, they all move to north to Maine, and they're seen together for basically mid-May into early June. Then they all sort of leave, they go out to sea, they spend a lot of time feeding. Mating and pupping is really energetically costly. And so they go out to sea and recover and gain weight. And then usually about 2 or 3 months after the breeding season, they haul out again in groups to molt. And so we see them in groups. They don't live in sort of highly socially structured groups, like when people think about something like an orca or a pilot whale or sperm whales, where there's sort of these very intricate relationships. We don't see that in seals, but we do see animals hauled out together or grouped together at certain time periods when there's certain events happening in their life history. Let me see, I see a couple more questions. Who brands the seals? That's great. So the branding program, it happens in Canada. There's no branding going on in this part of the US right now. So on Sable Island in particular, they've been, for a while, they were branding every pup born there from the early 1970s through the late 1980s. And then there just became too many animals to do that. So they now brand a subset of animals, and it allows for them to collect all sorts of life history information, things like how many animals survive from one year to the next, how often do they breed, how old are they when they first breed. Most of these animals tend to return to their where they're from to pup, and so it's really helpful to have that information. The seals blow up the red bubble. It's a structure within their nasal, one of their nasal passages, and then they actually inflate it. When they go out to sea, are they strictly in the water for months, or do they find small rock outcroppings? So that's a great question. Mostly they might go out for a couple of days. There are some seal species, say the elephant seal, which lives in the Pacific Ocean, they will be at sea for weeks at a time. But for our harbor and gray seals, usually they haul out every couple of days. All right, I think I got all those questions. Great. Okay, so thinking about where we see seals and where historically we haven't seen seals in this part of the world, we need to think about sort of their history and their history of interaction with humans. And so we know from both archaeological evidence and historic accounts that both gray and harbor seals were found throughout the Northeast coast. So this map on the left, made by my colleague Beth Josephson at the Fisheries Science Center, just demonstrates the various archaeological sites where seal remains have been found. And you can see that it's really all throughout the New England coast here. And then there's an account from the 1600s about a bounty of gray seals on Muskeget Island, which is in Nantucket Sound. And so we know that seals were an ecologically important part of this system. Oh, I see another question. Let's see. How do they go from white to gray? So that's another great question. So you can see, whoops, there we go, that the pups are born, they're born with what we call a white lanugo coat. And that's actually a leftover from gray seals are historically or evolutionarily ice seals. And so a lot of ice seals, when they're born, they have this white coat that helps them camouflage. And then when they're about 3 weeks old, they actually shed that lanugo fur, and then they grow in their sort of more juvenile coat or pelage. They're grayish color. And we see as they get older, generally males tend to have a darker coat with some lighter spots, and females tend to have a lighter coat with darker spots. There's variation within that, of course, but we generally tend to see that. And then sometimes they'll have sort of a brownish or a reddish color to them as well when they're adults. All right, so bounty of gray seals, right? So that there were plentiful gray seals throughout New England, but that turned into, unfortunately for the seals, a bounty on seals. And some of you may be aware of this, or you've probably heard of bounties on other species like coyotes, anything that humans perceived as basically a threat to livestock or a competitor. So in the sense of seals, that we were competing for the same fisheries resources. And so there were bounties, there were both state and local bounties in Maine and Massachusetts. And so you can see there's sort of longstanding bounties in the states, and then many towns, local coastal towns, had bounties. And the way bounties worked were basically you would go out and you would hunt a seal, you would turn in either a nose or a tail, and you'd be paid anywhere between $1 and $5 per your bounty kill. And so there's a couple of tricky things about this. It turns out there was a lot of cheating in the bounty system. So people would take one seal coat and turn that into a bunch of tails or something like that. So the numbers are a little tricky in terms of interpreting how significant this hunting pressure was, but there's an estimate by Laley et al. That over 40,000 bounties were paid. So certainly there was a lot of pressure in the 18 and early to mid 1900s on these populations that really brought their numbers down. Let me take a look at the Q&A. Why do they come back to the place where they were born to breed? So that's something called phylopatry, and we actually see that in a lot of species. And we actually see it in a lot of seabirds. So those of you out there who are really interested in also all the coastal nesting seabirds that use the harbor islands, we see this behavior in seabirds, we see it in seals. So there's a couple of reasons why that would happen. One is you're going back to a place where you were successfully weaned, so that's a good sign. For these species that really range over large areas, we often see systems like this because you don't want to be searching the whole North Atlantic to find a mate, right? But if you go back to Muskeget, or you go back to Seal Island in Maine, or you go back to Sable Island, there's going to be a lot of other animals there as well for you to find and mate with. So that's a great question. We see it in seabirds as well. It's also a really great question, which I sort of have ongoing and haven't quite figured out how to research this, but obviously there are some animals we know, for example, that Sable Island brand that was born on Sable Island, but came to Muskeget. So what's the mechanism that also allows some individuals to move into new spots? Seals make sounds just like we do. I actually have a vocalization that I will play in a few minutes. Why? So a couple of questions about why there were bounties. So the bounties were to get rid of the seals, basically to control the population so that there was less competition for fish resources, right? So they were perceived as a competitor for the same fish that we wanted to catch. So there are actually ongoing conversations about this as these populations have recovered. We often use the word cull now instead of bounty. But the goal is the same. It's to reduce a population to try to mitigate some sort of perceived threat. All right, so I will keep going. So lots of hunting pressure, right? But in 1965, the state of Massachusetts, in realizing basically there were few to no gray seals left in Mass waters, enacted a Gray Seal Protection Act. And then in 1972, the federal government enacted the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and that gave blanket protection to all marine mammals. So you may also be familiar with the fact that there was a lot of whaling, extended pressure on many whale populations where they were hunted mostly for their blubber, sometimes their baleen. And so a lot of marine mammal populations by the mid 1900s were really in rough shape. And so this Federal Marine Mammal Protection Act as well offers blanket protection from hunting and harassment. And so those were two important legal steps that helped the recovery of some of these species. Some species haven't been that lucky. For those of you who are familiar with the right whale story, right? Despite lots of protection, that species has not been able to recover in the same way as some of our other marine mammal species. So in thinking about more specifically Boston Harbor, when I started kind of thinking about seals in the harbor and how to think about them, I was curious about what can we find in terms of archaeological or anthropological accounts. And so I had a student, Warren Kevin Henderson, who actually did some research trying to piece together some information. And he was actually able to find two archaeological seal remains, one on Thompson Island, which was not identified to species, and then one on Spectacle Island, which was identified as a harbor seal. And then there were a couple of accounts as well from Pettix and then Grape Island. And Grape Island in particular, he found a great story about a captain who was living on Grape Island in the 1800s and happened to befriend a seal, and he adopted this seal as a pet. And his account was the seal was more affectionate than any dog he had ever had. So we know, again, sort of throughout the Northwest Atlantic, there were seals found. And then we also know that more specifically, they were found even in parts of Boston Harbor. Warren Kevin also found information about bounty hunts being paid in Boston Harbor as well. So again, people are sometimes surprised to hear there are seals in Boston Harbor, but historically, this is part of their range. All right, I see a hand raised. I'm not sure, I don't know that I can call on you, but if you want to put your question in the Q&A, I'd be happy to try and answer that. All right, I will keep going. So what's really interesting, again, in thinking about this recovery, and then I'm going to move on from that, is part of the recovery of some of these species is related to those laws that I talked about, but some of it is also related to a shift in human activity. And so we see now there are pupping sites, these are for gray seals in particular, all over parts of Mid-Coast Maine area and Nantucket Sound. 5 of the 9 important sites are actually within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge. And so just a plug out there, just like the Boston Harbor Islands, how the importance of having protected and open habitat is also really key for some of these species to return. This is an old picture of Muskeget Island, again, down in Nantucket Sound right here. And you can see in 1900, basically, there was somewhere close to 20 hunting cabins, and people were out hunting all winter on these islands. So if you're a pregnant seal, you're probably not going to pick an island where there's 20 cabins worth of people hunting to have your pup. And so protection has been important, but also shifts in habitat. For those of you who've been out on the Boston Harbor Islands, we can see remnants of things like forts, and we know that the islands were used for various sort of hospital setups and all sorts of different things, right? That we don't see that level of human activity. We see different types of human activity out there, but that's been an important shift as well. Human activity obviously influences species distribution and habitat use as well. All right, so normally, when, excuse me, normally the way we figure out how many seals are there and where are they is we fly aerial surveys. So we hop in a little plane and we fly over different sites and we take pictures, and then we come back and we count them and mark them and do various things. This is not from Boston Harbor. This is from down on the Cape. But obviously there's one big factor about Boston Harbor that makes this tricky, and that's Logan Airport, right? So we can't just go out and fly around over these islands. That's not safe. And so that led to this current project that I have, where we're actually doing boat-based monthly surveys. So we head out and we have a set route around the islands, and we're looking to document, excuse me, a few different things. So we're looking to document species composition, so who's there and when, the seasonality of the presence of the two species. Initially, I was looking for any sort of life history events, Are they using any of the islands for something like pupping? We're also looking for uniquely marked animals, and I'll return to that in just a minute. And then, of course, the seals in the Boston Harbor are such a great opportunity for public engagement, because people often think of wildlife as being, really far away from you, and that's not necessarily true. I see a Q&A, let me see. Are there seals in warmer places like Hawaii or California? So there are a lot of seals in California. There are monk seals in Hawaii, and elephant seals periodically are in Hawaii. So there were 3 species of monk seals, one found in Hawaii, one in the Caribbean, and one in the Mediterranean. And so the Caribbean monk seal actually has gone extinct, and both the Hawaiian and Mediterranean monk seals are not doing well. There's various reasons for that, a lot related to extensive human hunting, some again related to human use of the Hawaiian Islands with various military operations and things. But there are, and then along the coast of California for sure, you can find elephant seals, you can find, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the questions. You can find harbor seals in California. You can also find California sea lions. And then if you move up the coast further, you can see things like fur seals and things like that. Last year we saw, let me go back to the last organizational question. Did that answer? Gray white seals in the Ponce River about 3 weeks ago hunting for food. Yes, so we're definitely seeing them in a lot of areas where we haven't necessarily seen them for sure. So that doesn't surprise me. And seals will go up certainly into the mouth of rivers and sometimes even a little further up. All right, I'm gonna go back to this slide for a second here. So a couple of things. What we're doing is, one, when you see an X there, that means that we counted that in another slide. What we get is a whole series of photos that we then have to find the overlap and make sure we're not, so if we counted this slide in the slide that covers this area, we don't want to count it again here. So oftentimes, so we can keep track of what we're counting, I'll draw lines in just to keep track. And then what we see is excuse me, the pink and the green are harbor and gray seals, and then the blue is a species that is unknown. So that's what that's showing there. And then we just write the numbers there on the image and we go through and tally them all up. All right, let me see. So that was that question. Categorization, 2 seals in the water near North Washington Street, Charlestown. So again, I would say that that's becoming more common. I know it's surprising to see. And I think especially the seals in Boston Harbor, my colleagues and I are really interested in sort of getting to know the individuals more, because most seals are not found in Boston, right? In an urban harbor setting. And so it's really interesting. But again, in terms of habitat, it does make sense that we'd find them here. And I think it's also a good indication of the health of the environment, right? So this is saying to us this, they're finding places to rest, they're finding things to eat, which is pretty exciting. All right, so one other thing I wanted to mention, I'll mention again in my acknowledgement slide, but this particular part of this project, the harbor surveys have been funded by the Mass Environmental Trust, so I wanted to be sure to thank them as well for the funding and support for this project. So here's a couple of gray seals out at the graves. This is a dead harbor seal pup that was found on the graves a couple of years ago, and then that's the Graves Lighthouse out there. All right. Okay, oh, this is my little video. I'm hoping this is gonna work. So I know a lot of you have probably been out and done the winter wildlife cruise and the nice big warm boat, but that is not what we use. So we use, up here you can see this is the land, what we call the landing craft. So this is a UMass Boston boat, and that's what we use to hop around the islands. And I thought since we can't be on the water ourselves, I'd run a little video. What do seals eat? So seals eat fish, squid, and they really are generalists. So they eat a lot of what's available to them, and they eat a lot of what's in the area where they are. So they eat all sorts of flatfish, they eat herring, they eat sand lance, they eat hake, they eat cod, they eat lots of squid, depending on where they are, especially if they're up off the main coast. Okay, I'm gonna try and play this. Let's hope this works. Oh no. Oh no. It's not, shoot. All right. That is not playing for me. So I'm going to just move on to the next slide, and maybe at the end, if someone is tech savvy. There we go. So just to give you a little feel, since we're not out in the water today, at least a little feel for being on the water. So it's an open boat and it's lots of fun. It can definitely be a little cold, but it gets the job done. And thanks to my boat captain, Russ Bowles, he gets us out in all sorts of scenarios. Excuse me, this map here. So I started dedicated studies in July of 2019. But prior to that time, the Boston Harbor Islands National and State Park folks do a lot of work out on the islands, and they had some great opportunistic sighting data. And so this is just a map of some of the sites where they had been able to document seals. So again, this is, people are out doing, say, the Coastal Nesting Bird Project, and they see seals there, and so they mark it down. And so this was a great place for me to start in thinking about where we might find some seals. And so we've been able to, through these monthly dedicated surveys, add to that. And so here's UMass Boston, where I am and where we take off. So we've actually seen seals as close in as thimble, hangman long, lots of the ones you'd expect, George's, Levels, great brewster, calf, green, and the graves. And often what we see generally is we see gray seals in the outer harbor. Then we see sort of a mix. Calf Island, we see both gray and harbor seals often at the same time. As we head into places like Levels and George's, we really only see harbor seals there. Although interestingly enough, this fall we saw both harbor and gray seals in at hangman. So, the one rule in biology is, we make a rule and then there's always an exception. But generally what we see is this distribution where gray seals are further out and harbor seals are further into the harbor, which makes sense. Remember, we talked about they're called harbor seals because they tend to be more coastal. Let me see what this question is. Why do baby seals die? So there's a lot of different reasons for that. The main ones is they're dependent on their mom being able to transfer enough milk to fatten them up. They have about 3 weeks to do that. So harbor seals in particular are actually born sometimes on haulouts where it's actually flooded by high tide. So I've seen a harbor seal puppy born and swimming like 20 minutes later. So they're born into a pretty intense environment. The mom needs to be able to transfer enough milk, so that could be limited by her physical body condition. It could be limited by things like disturbance if they're constantly alerted because of predators or human activity or whatever it is and having to go into the water. So mom body condition is huge. Mom experience is huge. So older, bigger moms tend to more successfully wean pups. And the other thing to remember is when they're weaned, which is about 3 weeks old. So harbor seals stick with their moms a little bit, so they get a little bit of training to find fish, but gray seals, actually their moms abruptly wean them and then they hang out on the island where they're born for maybe another week. And then gray seal pups at about 4 weeks old actually go into the water and have to teach themselves to feed. So they're just, because of that natural history, early mortality tends to be pretty high, somewhere between 40 and 60%. But if you can get to be about age 3 or 4, annual mortality drops really low, like less than 5%. So great question. Let me see what else. How does pollution impact the seals? So this is not my total area of expertise, but a couple of things. There are a lot of various pollutants that act as what we call endocrine disruptors. So the chemical structure of the molecule can look similar to other molecules. So they can impact not just seals, but all wildlife in terms of reducing fertility because they disrupt the endocrine system. They can also have impacts on immune system response and make animals more susceptible to other things. We also see all sorts of, just like in humans, we see wildlife diseases. So we can find things like influenza A in seal species. I have colleagues at places like Tufts that are doing a lot of looking at things like that. We have morbillivirus that we find in animals. And so just like humans, we can see things like outbreaks. And if your immune system is already sort of suppressed or overstressed because of exposure to other pollutants, it can negatively impact the seals. Great question. male seals from female seals? So that is another great question. It depends on the species. So for harbor seals, it can be pretty tricky. They are not very sexually dimorphic. So from a distance, it's pretty difficult to tell a harbor seal from a harbor seal male from a female. For the gray seals, the males tend to be about 200 or 300 pounds bigger, and they have that really big horse head. So if you can get a profile shot or you can just see the size, you can tell. Now, when they're juvenile, again, it's a little bit trickier, but those are the things that you'd be looking for. And then physically, when you're close to a seal, you can actually examine them and look for things like a penile opening, which you would find obviously only in males. Harp seals are being spotted off the Cape Cod more often. I have not seen any harp seals near Boston Harbor. And it's interesting, we sort of have these periodic times when we see more ice seals. So in the late 1990s, there was this uptick in ice seals stranding in Massachusetts and Maine. And so I have not seen any, but there seems to be sort of a periodic flow or pulse of ice seals showing up here. Seals most active early day. So they are active at all times of their day. I would say their activity level is most driven by the tidal cycles usually. So they tend to haul out at low tides when there's more exposed areas. Oh, there we go. So Rachel just chimed in. A few years ago, they found a harp seal at World's End and NEAQ came out and took care of it. Exactly. That's great. All right. Here we go. I'm trying to keep track of my time. Okay. Oh, I better keep moving. Okay. All right. So a couple of things. So getting into Boston Harbor itself. So we've had a lot of success. So since, so early on, these were a couple of surveys where I was able to pop onto some Park Service boats. And then again, I started this monthly dedicated survey in July. And so we've actually been able to get out every month except for November of 2019. So that's pretty exciting because it's New England and these are winter months. A couple of things. So you'll see here, this is a female gray seal and you'll notice that there's this huge bulge there. So this was taken in November out at the Graves by Caitlin Fitzmaurice, who took a bunch of these pictures. You'll see her name a few times. She's a master's student at UMass Boston. So here's a female in November. Now what's interesting, we see a couple of trends that are sort of fairly stark. So the gray seals have their pups, remember, from basically December to early February. And so we see that there are no gray seals in the harbor during those months. So these animals are moving to those other sites in the Mid-Coast Maine area or Nantucket Sound. This is a picture from, excuse me, December. And we can see, so here's a gray seal. You can sort of see that long head there. And then we have harbor seals. They look more dog-like. So this is Calf Island, again, in that mid-coast area, for those of you who are familiar with where the islands are. And so we see at some times of the year, again, animals intermixing. So this is probably, I should mention, a juvenile gray seal. I'm realizing I need to change that. We also see sometimes, we see a decrease in the number of harbor seals in the summer because all harbor seals that are mating actually go up to Maine to mate. All right. If they fall asleep and the tide comes in, what will happen? They will wake up and they will get in the water. And you can see it sometimes. You can tell they sort of get hit by a wave, and it is probably a little startling. Okay, so hopefully this is going to be some gray seals vocalizing out at the Graves. And what you didn't see prior to this, because I didn't get my camera recording quickly enough, is that a third gray seal was trying to hop up onto this ledge with these other two, and they were not having it. So let's see if this will play for me. If not, I'll keep moving. Oh no, why even practiced? Shoot. All right. All right. Well, I will keep going and see if we can do that at the end. Sorry, I even did it. There it goes. All right, sorry. Hopefully you could hear that. If not, I think it will be posted and you can replay it. But that was a gray seal saying, "Get out of here. I don't want you in my face. Me and my friend are here on this rock and you are not invited." So, all right, another sort of new step in this project, and this is being undertaken by Caitlin Fitzmaurice, who I mentioned, who's a master's student at UMass Boston, is we're actually starting up a photo ID project. And so photo ID is basically when we take pictures of individual animals and we look for certain markings to identify them. Okay, I answered that question. Okay. And so right now we're targeting Georges. We may add calf and gray. We will use graves as well for the gray seals that are out there. So this is a picture. I know people are often surprised. If you've been to Georges in the summer, there are no seals there, but in the winter months, there are actually usually around 9 or 10 harbor seals off the backside of Georges on those little rocks. So that green bell is right over here. And so you can actually sort of hike out to that side of the island. This is an overview picture. And here's a picture of Caitlin taking pictures. And so we're targeting Georges and, like I said, a couple of islands to see if we can individually identify different animals. And I'll get to the next slide. There we go. So this is, again, a close-up of a harbor seal here. But you look for things like that. See that sort of unique pattern right there under the left flipper. So you look for unique patterns or markings to identify individuals, and this will give us information about things like residency time. You know, is it always the same 9 harbor seals out on Georges, or is it always different? Which is interesting life history information, interesting in terms of the subset of animals that are using this unique site. People are doing photo ID in places like Isle Shoals off the coast of New Hampshire. There are people doing photo ID on the Cape. So this is, you know, our hope long-term, our being the Royal We Seal researchers, is to really build a catalog to see if we can keep track of these animals. Do seals make friends like dolphins do? So no, they do not have that strong of a social connection. They don't have that more complex social structure. Do we name the seals when we identify? So sometimes people will name them based on, you know, I know someone had a seal and the marking looked like a bear claw mark or something like that. So people will name them like that. There's a lot of back and forth over whether we should name animals or not. You know, as scientists, we're supposed to stay neutral, and we're not supposed to anthropomorphize them. And so, but on the other hand, it is an easier way to keep track of them, and it's exciting, right? People are really interested in these animals. So we have not gotten far enough. Caitlin is just starting to build this database, so we haven't gotten that far. Certainly I can see using names that are indicative of the pattern that we see would be very useful. All right, I see another question there. Okay, good. All right, so that just gives you an idea. Again, I love this picture. This is a gray seal out near Calf Island, and here you can see a whole bunch of kayakers. And so I think I mentioned this already, but it's exciting to have these animals in a place where there are people there to have this wildlife accessible. And I also think, again, they're indicative of the health of this environment. And it's sort of really neat to see individuals that are normally much further out in the wild, quote unquote, to be using these islands. This will be a little shameless plug for a project that I have that unfortunately I started, and then COVID obviously impacted us all in a variety of ways. So I haven't quite promoted this in the same way, but if and when you all are back out on the water and you see a seal, we would love to see your pictures. So this is a site where you can actually upload a picture and we can add it to our database. Just a reminder, as always, they are wild, they are protected, and so you don't want to impact them negatively. And the guideline is to stay 150 feet away. And I can maybe send that link directly as well, so that can be posted to you all. Or I guess you can go back through the recording as well. A couple of other quick slides, because I know we're starting to get to the end of the time period here. I just wanted to mention another project I'm involved in, Exploreorg. This is a really amazing website, not just for seals, but for all sorts of projects around the world. The project I'm involved in actually has a remotely operated camera on Seal Island in Mid-Coast, Maine, where the seals are pupping. Caitlin and I have been investigating, mostly Caitlin, I'll say, if we can use this system for photo ID as well. And really cool, a few weeks ago, I know that's hard to see there, but we found a branded seal that had been born in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in 2016. So again, really amazing to try to connect these animals, ID where they are, and see what's going on. I also have a SCAT project, which I'll just mention briefly because I'm hoping to start to incorporate samples from Boston Harbor. We have an ongoing SCAT sampling project at Great Point on Nantucket. SCAT, for those of you who don't know, is poop. And so here you can see that's me collecting some poop. That's a weaned gray seal pup. There's the Great Point Lighthouse out on the tip of Nantucket there. And so it might be smelly, but we can actually learn a lot of things from SCAT. We can learn about food habits. We can look for microplastics. So these are pictures from some samples that have been analyzed by Julianne Darnell and Jack Barkowski, who were undergrads at UMass Boston. And we can also get information about the seal microbiome. So here you see this is a little plastic microbead. Probably most of you have heard that microplastics are pretty pervasive in our environment, and there's growing evidence that microplastics can actually impact things like your microbiome, which is all the various bacteria that we have living on us, living in our GI tract, and that can really negatively impact, the plastics can negatively impact the microbiome diversity, which negatively impacts health. I see a couple of questions. Let me go look. Any seer sightings around Deer Island or Winthrop? Not that I know of. I have not seen, you can see them. I shouldn't say that. They are sometimes on the rocks right off of levels with Deer Island in the background. So I guess, yes, sort of. If we have seen seals in the past, yes, you can definitely, if you have pictures and you have a location and a date, definitely upload those pictures. That would be awesome. All right, so that's SCAT. Again, we're hoping to target probably hangman's, maybe calf for some SCAT collection as well, and fold that into this project. All right, so lots of different acknowledgements. Again, I mentioned special thanks to the Mass Environmental Trust for funding this study, my boat captain Russ at UMass Boston, Boston Harbor Islands National and State Park, which has been great partners and super supportive of getting this work done, in particular Mark Albert, UMass Boston students Warren Kevin Henderson and Caitlin Fitzmaurice. I want to mention all of this work is done under a Federal Marine Mammal Protection Act that I collaborate with folks at the National Marine Fisheries Service Northeast Fisheries Science Center, my colleague Kimberly Murray there, who's been supportive of this project, and then lots of people who help out with the SCAT. All right, and that is where I will stop, and I think there might be just a few minutes for questions. Oh, I see a Q&A. Let's see. Oh, great. Thanks, Rachel. Nice to see you, or ECU. And I don't know, I can stop sharing my screen now, maybe? That'd be helpful. Let's see. How many seals in the harbor? Great question. I should have mentioned that when I had my little table up. So my highest single day count was a minimum of 60, and that was last April, and it was actually on Easter Sunday in April. So what's interesting is it was about a month into the COVID pandemic, and so it was really at the height of when most people were staying at home, and so the harbor was really quiet. It was also a Sunday holiday, so I'll be curious to see what we see this spring. All right, what species is my favorite? Probably the gray seals, just because I've spent most of my time studying gray seals. My name is Stephanie Wood. All right, great. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you again very much. If you're out on the harbor and see some seals and take some pictures, definitely upload them or send them to me. And thanks again for inviting me to talk about seals in the harbor.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that wonderful presentation. I know I learned quite a lot. We want to thank all of you for attending as well. Our next presentation is Interpreting Nor'easters, Illustrating Coastal Change and Storm Response. And we hope to see you back here in just a few minutes at 11 a.m. Thank you.